I heard you say you can tell a lot about somebody's psychological well-being by the way they handle conflict. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's real easy for you or me or anybody else to be friendly and coordinated and helpful when that other person happens to be exactly like I want them to be. Anybody can do that. And so when I am trying to ascertain where a person is in their personal or emotional sense of well-being, I'm not watching exactly how they do things when everything is smooth and keen.
Hmm.
But you'll really get a measure of where a person is by watching how they manage conflict, because that's when you have to draw upon the real maturity and the skill set that says, okay, we differ, things aren't going well, this could potentially come apart at the seams. And I want to see if we can turn this into something that's less than that, obviously, or maybe even we can turn it into a growth opportunity. So it's really interesting to see that. That's when you're going to know if the person in front of you has a sense of steadiness and stability. Watch how they manage people when they're not pleased or when other folks are just really different.
Right. And so how can, in the context of people who are toxic, I know one of the things you said is that sometimes, one of the manipulation tactics of toxic people is to use anger to manipulate people's emotions. How can somebody tell if that's being done to them versus somebody who just happens to be angry?
Well, let me kind of give you a little backdrop as a perspective on this. I'm 70 years old now, and way back when I finished my graduate training, I was a 26-year-old green person who thought I knew everything, but I didn't. And I had a supervisor in the place where I did my doctoral internship who had done a lot of concentration on anger management. And he handed a whole lot of notes to me and said, "Les, run with it. You've got my blessing." Ross Bannister, what a great guy. And so in my early career, I began to put together anger workshops. And I had checklists and handouts, and it was a good way for a young therapist like me to kind of get my feet wet, etc. And as I would go through all of the different machinations of anger, I began realizing that it's in the person's moments of anger that you can see that are you going to be a conniver? Are you going to be somebody who's uber controlling? Are you going to be somebody that is a peacekeeper or somebody who's a bridge builder? And anger is one of the natural byproducts of individuals who are the connivers. Interestingly, Doug, the longer I did my workshops, and I did them for years, we would talk about issues like how angry people have problems with trying to control others, or they're super defensive and they're fear based, and they don't operate truthfully on so many different ways, and they have to have superiority. And as the years went by, it began to dawn on me, I'm talking about classic narcissism here. And so, to me, anger mismanagement is a natural outflow of the pattern of narcissism. And so it just all goes hand in hand. And highly toxic, like you say, narcissistic individuals are just, I mean, it's not a maybe, it's a guarantee. The net result waiting at the end of all of that is going to be they're going to have some real anger issues.
Talk about the different types of anger and the way that they're expressed. I think oftentimes people associate anger with yelling, screaming, even some violence, but that's not always the case. Anger can also show up as being passive aggressive, as somebody just completely shutting down to try and control a conversation. Talk about the different types of anger that people need to be aware of.
Okay. Well, let's back up on that one, and let's even go so far as to say exactly what is a person wishing to accomplish when they experience anger. And it's important for us to first and foremost understand anger as an emotion that taps into your need for self-preservation. Okay. So the angry individual is in a self-preserving mode. Something is going on in front of me that I don't like, or I disagree with, or it's bothersome. I need to take care of myself. And in a legitimate sense, you can say, well, that angry person is wishing to stand up for their worth as a human being. It's their way of saying, would you please treat me with some respect? Okay, I can buy that. Or they're trying to stand up for their basic needs. Hey, look, I've got needs. Can you please factor those in? Or third, they're trying to stand up for their core convictions. There's certain things that I believe in and I don't want to back down. And so that's the basis of what's going on inside of a person who's feeling angry. They're wanting to preserve worth, needs, and convictions. Okay, so that's the beginning point. But then, as you just mentioned, there are different ways that we go about managing that. Now, for example, some individuals, and these typically are the ones who have a hard time dealing with troublesome people. Some of them will just suppress. They just shut down. It's like, I don't want to talk. I don't want to reveal anything. It's going to get me in trouble. This is going to be nowhere good. And so what they do is they store up their anger. It's what I refer as the trash can effect. You put trash in the trash sack, and at the end of the day, it starts smelling. And then, when you hold on to your anger and suppress over time, it begins getting a smelly effect. Others, though, they decide, I want to stand up for my worth and my needs and my convictions. And you know what? I'm going to do it at your expense too. I don't care about you. And that's the openly aggressive person. That's the person that says, when you come against me, I'm going to make you pay, and it's going to hurt. And so these are the brash. And when we talk about toxic, they're the overtly toxic people, and harsh and mean spirited, name calling and yelling, and just like you said, they're the ones that give anger a really bad name. But then, like you just mentioned, we also have people that think, well, if I get too loud with my anger, then I expose myself to problems that I don't want to get into. So they go the passive route in expressing their anger. It's like, and we call that passive aggressive. And these are the people that when they're angry, they become um, deliberately non cooperative. And there can be all sorts of ways that can play out. The passive aggressive person is someone that lets it be known, if you want some sort of coordination with me, not going to happen. And so they can promise to do something and then not deliver. They can say whatever you want to hear at the time, and then later on it's like, I never said that. Or they can be lazy, or they can procrastinate, or they can become evasive and secretive. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that they go about that. And so yeah, there are different ways that people will go into their anger space and conflict resolution. And again, the way they do so reveals the extent or not of their psychological maturity.
And I know there's different types of narcissists. There's covert, which is more of like the hidden one, I think, and then there's,
Right.
is it overt? Is that the one that's more outgoing? Does the anger correlate to this the type of narcissist a person is like somebody who is more passive aggressive and shuts down? Do they tend to be more covert? And is the opposite also true?
Yeah, in a general sense, yes. But we're not going to say 100% definitively, but yes, generally speaking. For example, you can have that overt narcissist, and when they get angry, they're in that self preservation mode. But their need for control and their condescension and attitude of superiority just cannot be contained, and they will let you know. And so the overt narcissist can be they have a hard time shutting themselves down, and they can be very strongly belligerent. Now, sometimes though, when the overt narcissist has just completely said everything they can do, and they've been as mean and harsh as they can, then they can still go into the passive aggressive mode. As an example, let's suppose that narcissistic person has screamed and yelled and laid a person to just put them in rubble, and then after a while, it's like, okay, I'm done, and then they won't talk to you for 2 weeks, or they'll just give you that cold, hard stare. Or when you say something to them, they just act as if you don't even exist, and that's the passive aggressive. So you can have obviously some overlay. The covert narcissist, they're more known for wanting to give an impression of having it together, And so the phoniness factor for them is stronger because they like to portray themselves as more approachable than they really are. And so, sure enough, those individuals would be the kind that would, when they're angry, it's like, I may not yell, but I'm not going to give you the time of day, and so, or I'm not going to cooperate, or I'll say whatever you want, but don't count on me. As far as I'm concerned, you're a nobody to me. And so they can be more subtle and below the radar. And so, but then there are times when they can get pushed, and then boom, they blow, and they go into that openly aggressive way, and then people are saying to themselves, "Where did that come from?" Because this seems so out of character. But it's really not, because they've been holding it for so long. So as a general rule, you'd have those distinctions, but each of them can be drawn out of their general propensity and go into other unhealthy ways because they just don't have an internal compass that's going to guide them towards the healthy path.
And well, from what I understand, a lot of what they're doing in situations like that is trying to maintain control and a power dynamic, right? And
Yes.
I think a lot of people, if either they're not familiar with that or maybe they're not good at regulating themselves, they fall victim to that and they kind of fall into the trap of the narcissist, right? Um, how can what should somebody do instead? Like, how can somebody take their power back when there's a narcissist that's trying to fight with them, argue with them, and use their anger in a manipulative way?
Well, that's a great question, Doug, because in fact, one of the things when I was in my therapy practice that I would coach people with is you can't afford yourself to, you can't afford to allow the narcissist to establish your pace. Because if they yell, then you yell. Or if they go down some real insulting ways, you become insulting, and in doing so, it's like, yeah, now I've turned into a hypocrite. I'm mad at a person for being this awful person, but I'm acting just like them, and I don't want to be that kind of person. And so, first, there just needs to be a delineation where that individual who's on the receiving end of this unruly anger, that person needs to say, those are choices. And that's the way that narcissistic individual is taking himself or herself. But I have choices too, and I choose not to go that path. And that's hard because when you're in conflict and anger and all, you tend to run with the mood of the moment. Sometimes you have to rehearse this well in advance. But the better choice, to get to your question, is assertive anger. You've heard us talk about, you need to learn how to be assertive, and there's some people that have a very wrong understanding of what assertive means. So I think some people think that if you're assertive, you can just say whatever you want to say, and if others don't like it, that's just tough. And it's like, no, that sounds like aggressive to me. Assertive anger means I'm going to stand up for who I am. I'm going to stand up for my worth and my needs and my convictions, but I'm going to do it with a certain amount of civility. I know that I want to be treated respectfully when somebody is frustrated with me, and even whether they are or not, I want to at least offer what I would prefer to be offered to me. And so, notice your tone of voice. You can say things with firmness and with conviction, but you don't have to insult them along the way, and you don't have to be harsh and mean spirited. And you don't have to ramble and go on and on and on. And so that's the better distinction. And then there's a whole other topic we can get into as well, and that is eventually you get to the point where you appeal to higher priorities. It's like, I don't want to stay angry for the rest of the day, or I don't want to just have this experience of conflict to go on and on. I've got other things I want to do with my psychological self, like be patient or accept an ugly truth or move on to something else. And so the healthy individual realizes choice is always in the middle of our anger and our conflict resolution patterns. What choices will I make that will differentiate me in a healthy way from that toxic, narcissistic controller?
So can we use like a real life example to put things into perspective for people so that way they kind of can have an idea of what this all looks like?
Well, I'll give you a great illustration. I talked to this fellow not that long ago, and he's middle aged, let's say in his 50, early 50s. And he has a father who's roughly around 80 years old. And this younger man would say, whenever I'm around my father, we have to be so careful not to step on these little landmines, if you will. You know, if you talk about the wrong topic, or you use the wrong tone of voice, or if you express an opinion that is just not what he wants, then out of nowhere he can just go off. And he can just say, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," or "Where did you come up with something like that?" or "Nobody's going to come into my house," that kind of guy. And this younger guy was talking to me, and he said, it used to be that I would get so triggered that whenever he would treat me in that disdainful way, I started yelling back at him. And he said that goes all the way back to when I was a teenager. And I would say stuff like, "Well, I hate you, and why would I ever want to listen to you?" And it continued off and on in a more muffled kind of way in his 20s and 30s and 40s. And he said, and this is a guy that was finally coming in to do something about it. It's like, his blood runs through me. His DNA is in my body, and I have the propensity to be like him, and that scares me to death. And so we started started exploring. Well, when your dad goes off, what are your options? And let's put all the options on the table. You can scream. You can tell him he's an idiot. You can tell him he's ruined your life. You can say that he doesn't know what he's talking about, or nobody like. You can say all that kind of stuff. Then the question is, how's that going to work? And of course, the answer is, well, all it does is it just riles him up, and I go home and I'm in a worse mood than I ever was. Well, what are your other options? We came with what I refer to as to a concept that I call calm firmness. And when we use calm firmness, I can say something like, "Dad, I know that that's very important to you, but it's just not a topic I want to get into." Or when he says, "You're nobody with a half a brain would think the way you think," then my calm, firm response could be something like, "Well, that's an interesting perspective, but it's one that I don't share with you, Dad." And when you have that calmness, and you stand firmly, or if he says, "Well, I just think these people are a bunch of idiots, and they don't have it, they shouldn't be making decisions about anything," and you might say something like, "I'd like to show respect to those people. You call them idiots. I call them people who just differ from me. So we differ on that one too, Dad." And so we started just going through all sorts of scenarios where he used to get triggered, and he felt empowered. In other words, you mean to tell me I get to choose who I'm going to be, and I don't have to be reactive and harsh and condescending like him? And I said, "Well, yeah, that we have a word for that. It's called maturation. The more you mature, the more you realize he's acting like an 8-year-old kid out on the playground, that bully, and he's 80 years old. And I don't want to be the fellow 8-year-old kid who kicks him in the shins when he kicks me in the shins. I'm not going to be that way." And so when you talk with individuals about that, there can actually be a great sense of delight, not in the sense that you have to deal with it, but in the sense it says, "I get to claim a much healthier version of me. What does that look like? And give me an opportunity, and I think I can pull it off."